Imagine the frozen, snow-swept plains of Hokkaido, the northernmost island of the Japanese archipelago. The year is 1985. The temperature is 20 degrees below zero. Hidden in the dense, freezing pine forests are hundreds of massive, heavily armored Japanese Type 74 and Type 90 main battle tanks. Their engines are idling, blowing plumes of white exhaust into the freezing air. The commanders are staring through their optics across the La Perouse Strait toward the Soviet Union. They are waiting for the apocalypse. They are waiting for the Soviet Red Army to launch a massive, mechanized amphibious invasion across the ice and snow, attempting to seize the northern half of Japan in a brutal, grinding, symmetrical tank war. For 40 years, this specific, terrifying nightmare dictated absolutely every single aspect of Japanese military doctrine. The Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, JGSDF, was forged to be a heavy, static, heavily armored shield. They built an army designed to fight the Russians in the snow. Now, erase that image from your mind. Fast forward to the year 2026. The snow is gone. The temperature is 95 degrees with 90% humidity. You are standing on a tiny, densely vegetated tropical island in the Ryukyu chain, thousands of kilometers to the south, just off the eastern coast of Taiwan. The threat is no longer a massive wave of Soviet tanks rolling over the plains. The threat is a highly sophisticated, multi-domain Chinese amphibious assault force attempting to seize the first island chain. If the Japanese military attempts to fight this 21st century tropical island war using the 20th century army they built for the snows of Hokkaido, they will be mathematically, completely annihilated. A 50-ton main battle tank is an incredible machine on a wide-open plain. But on a tiny jungle island, it is a liability. The civilian bridges cannot support its weight. The narrow mountain roads cannot accommodate its width. And most devastatingly, you cannot quickly fly a 50-ton tank 2,000 kilometers across the ocean when a crisis erupts. It requires a massive, slow-moving transport ship that will be instantly targeted and sunk by a Chinese cruise missile before it ever reaches the combat zone. The strategic planners in Tokyo looked at the map, they looked at their heavy armor, and they realized they were holding the wrong weapon for the wrong war. So, in an act of breathtaking, ruthless institutional courage, the Japanese military has decided to do the unthinkable. They are intentionally tearing their own army down. They are deliberately stripping the heavy armor off their forces. They are slaughtering their sacred cows, slashing their tank fleets, and abandoning the static shield. In its place, they are building a hypermobile, missile-hauling, autonomous ghost force. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a forensic, deep-dive tactical analysis into the most violent, unvarnished military restructuring in the Indo-Pacific. The death of the Japanese tank and the birth of the standoff infantry. Here is the thesis for this episode. In modern warfare, if you cannot move your lethality at the speed of an aircraft, your lethality is irrelevant. The era of the heavy, mechanized set-piece battle is dead in the Pacific. To survive against a hyper-industrialized superpower like the Chinese Communist Party, an army must be light enough to fly, fast enough to evade, and armed heavily enough to sink a cruiser from 1,000 kilometers away. If you are beginning to understand why the true metrics of military power in the 21st century are not measured by how much thick steel you can bolt onto a tank, but by the strategic mobility of your logistics, the autonomy of your strike units, and the brutal mathematics of your kill chains, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the nostalgic, outdated military paradigms to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually fights, hacks its own hardware, and adapts to survive. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. If you read the traditional military journals, they will tell you that the Japanese military is constrained by its pacifist constitution. They will tell you that the JGSDF is a defensive police force that poses no threat to Beijing. Those journals are living in the past. In 2026, the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force is undergoing a metamorphosis that is terrifying the strategic planners in the People's Liberation Army, PLA. They are transforming from a localized, static defense force into an expeditionary, high-speed, long-range killing machine. We are going to break down the death of the tank, the agonizing, historic decision to slash the heavy armor fleet by over 50% and abandon the Hokkaido paradigm. We are going to analyze the Type 16 revolution, the absolute genius of prioritizing 8 rubber wheels over steel tracks, and how the Kawasaki C2 cargo plane has become the ultimate tactical enabler. We will explore the Taboo Brigade, the activation of the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade, and why Japan finally decided it needed an elite force explicitly mandated to violently retake lost territory. And finally, we will expose the standoff infantry, how the JGSDF is decentralizing its power, handing the keys to the US Tomahawk cruise missile directly to the infantryman, and turning the entire Ryukyu Island chain into a 1,000-kilometer meat grinder. Let us begin by confronting the elephant in the room: the sheer, undeniable obsolescence of the heavy tank in the Pacific theater, and the brutal restructuring that followed. The legacy of the Cold War shield. To truly appreciate the sheer scale of the institutional earthquake happening within the JGSDF today, you must first understand the deep, entrenched culture they are violently tearing down. For the vast majority of its existence, the JGSDF was dominated by the armor mafia. During the Cold War, the Japanese military establishment was fixated on the northern threat. The Soviet Union stationed massive armored formations just across the water in the Far East. The strategic consensus in Washington and Tokyo was that if World War III erupted, the Soviets would immediately launch an amphibious and airborne invasion of Hokkaido to secure their access to the Pacific Ocean. Hokkaido is geographically unique in Japan. Unlike the dense, mountainous and heavily urbanized terrain of Honshu, Hokkaido features wide-open plains, rolling hills and vast agricultural expanses. It is prime tank country. To counter this Soviet threat, the JGSDF built a massive, incredibly heavy armored shield. At its peak, Japan fielded an arsenal of over 1,200 main battle tanks. They developed the Type 74 and later the phenomenal Type 90, a 50-ton beast equipped with a 120mm smoothbore gun and an advanced autoloader, designed specifically to go toe-to-toe with Soviet T-72s and T-80s in the freezing mud and snow of the north. The entire logistical, doctrinal and promotion structure of the Japanese army revolved around the tank regiments. They were the undisputed kings of the battlefield. But as the 21st century dawned, the geopolitical tectonic plates shifted violently. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The threat of a massive Russian armored invasion of Hokkaido evaporated into historical irrelevance. A new, vastly more capable and technologically sophisticated threat rose in the south. The People's Republic of China began aggressively modernizing its military, expanding its naval footprint, and asserting violent claims over the Senkaku Islands and the broader East China Sea. The strategic center of gravity for Japan swung 2,000 kilometers away from the snow plains of Hokkaido, directly to the humid, tropical and heavily fragmented geography of the southwest island chain, the Ryukyus. The mathematical liability of heavy armor. When the strategic planners in Tokyo looked at how they would defend these remote southern islands against the Chinese amphibious assault, they realized their massive tank fleet was completely, hopelessly useless. It was a problem of brutal, unforgiving physics and logistics. A Type 90 tank weighs 50 tons. The newer, highly advanced Type 10 tank weighs 44 tons. You cannot simply drive a 50-ton tank from Tokyo to the island of Yonaguni. You have to put it on a ship. But moving heavy armor by sea is an agonizingly slow, incredibly vulnerable process. It requires specialized roll-on/roll-off RORO vessels or massive amphibious transport docks. In a high-intensity conflict with China, the moment a Japanese transport ship carrying a battalion of Type 90 tanks leaves port, it will be tracked by Chinese satellites and targeted by a swarm of YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles or DF-21D ballistic missiles. The tanks will be sent to the bottom of the ocean before they ever see the combat zone. Furthermore, even if by some miracle the tanks successfully landed on a remote island like Miyakojima or Ishigaki, they would be functionally paralyzed. These are tiny jungle-covered islands. The infrastructure was built for civilian cars, not mechanized warfare. The vast majority of the civilian bridges on these islands have strict weight limits. If a 50-ton tank tries to cross, the bridge will collapse. The roads are narrow, winding through steep, mountainous terrain. A tank track tears up the asphalt, destroying the very infrastructure the defenders need to move supplies. The Japanese army realized they possessed an incredible multi-billion-dollar shield that was physically incapable of protecting the territory that was actually under threat. The ruthless restructuring. This realization triggered a brutal, uncompromising restructuring known as the National Defense Program Guidelines, NDPG, and the subsequent defense build-up programs. The Japanese Ministry of Defense made an agonizing decision that infuriated the traditionalists. They officially mandated the systematic destruction of their heavy armor capability. They announced that the JGSDF tank fleet would be slashed by over 50%. The days of fielding 1,200 tanks were over. The target number was violently reduced to roughly 300 tanks, primarily consolidating them in Hokkaido and Kyushu, while completely removing them from the rapid response calculus for the southern islands. Simultaneously, they slashed their heavy, towed artillery fleet, replacing them with lighter, more mobile systems. This was not a budget cut disguised as a strategy. It was a deliberate, calculated shedding of weight. Japan recognized that in a war against a hyper-industrialized superpower, mass is a liability if it cannot be rapidly deployed. They needed a force that could be loaded onto an airplane, flown 2,000 kilometers in 3 hours, landed on a short, austere dirt runway, and immediately driven into the jungle to engage the enemy. They needed to replace tracks with wheels. They needed the Type 16, the anatomy of the apex predator. If you want to see the physical manifestation of Japan's radical military transformation, look no further than the Type 16 Maneuver Combat Vehicle, MCV. To a civilian, the Type 16 looks like a tank. It has a massive, imposing turret housing a high-velocity 105mm rifled main gun, capable of firing armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot, APFSDS, rounds and high-explosive anti-tank heat munitions. It possesses advanced, networked fire control systems, laser rangefinders and third-generation thermal optics that rival anything on an American M1 Abrams. But look beneath the turret. There are no heavy, clanking steel tracks. Instead, the Type 16 rolls on 8 massive, independent, run-flat rubber tires. This single engineering decision, choosing wheels over tracks, changes the entire strategic geometry of the Japanese military. A tracked main battle tank is a logistical nightmare. To move a tank long distances over land, you cannot simply drive it on the highway. The steel tracks will destroy the road surface, and the tank will burn through its fuel supply and transmission life cycle in a matter of hours. You have to load the tank onto a massive heavy equipment transporter, HET, truck, drive the truck to the destination and then unload the tank. This requires an enormous logistical tail. The Type 16 MCV completely severs this logistical tether. Because it operates on 8 wheels, the Type 16 can be driven directly on civilian highways at speeds exceeding 100 km per hour. It does not need a transport truck. If a crisis erupts, a regiment of Type 16s can drive out of their base on the Japanese mainland, merge onto the national expressway system, and self-deploy across the country with terrifying speed and minimal logistical friction. But the true world-changing capability of the Type 16 is not its highway speed. It is its weight. The Kawasaki C2 lifeline. The Type 16 was explicitly, meticulously engineered from the ground up to weigh approximately 26 tons. This specific weight limit was not chosen at random. It was the exact, absolute maximum payload capacity required to fit flawlessly into the cargo hold of the Kawasaki C2. The Kawasaki C2 is Japan's indigenous, state-of-the-art, twin-engine military transport aircraft. It is the tactical enabler that makes the entire rapid deployment strategy possible. Let us wargame the wheels over tracks revolution in a high-intensity 2026 scenario. Intelligence indicates that the People's Liberation Army is preparing a sudden, gray zone, amphibious assault to seize the remote Japanese island of Miyakojima. In the old paradigm, the Japanese military would have to scramble a transport ship, load heavy tanks and sail for 3 days, arriving long after the Chinese Marines had already fortified the beaches. Under the new doctrine, the response is measured in hours, not days. A rapid deployment regiment on the main island of Honshu is activated. The Type 16 MCVs drive directly onto the tarmac at an airbase. They roll up the rear ramp and into the cargo holds of waiting Kawasaki C2 transport planes. Within 90 minutes, the C2s are airborne, flying at high subsonic speeds over the Pacific Ocean. Because the C2 is designed for short takeoff and landing, STOL, operations on austere runways, it does not need a massive international airport. The planes touch down on the small 2,000-meter civilian runway on Miyakojima. The rear ramps drop. The Type 16 MCVs immediately roll out of the aircraft. They do not require complex unloading cranes. They do not require tank transporters. Their engines are running, their guns are loaded, and they hit the tarmac at 60 miles an hour. They drive straight off the runway, utilizing the civilian road network to rapidly disperse into the jungle canopy. By the time the Chinese amphibious assault vehicles, like the ZTD-05, hit the beaches, they are not facing a defenseless island. They are facing a highly mobile, heavily armed network of 105mm cannons executing aggressive shoot-and-scoot ambushes. By prioritizing strategic airlift and wheeled mobility, Japan has effectively collapsed the tyranny of distance. They can project heavy, mechanized firepower across thousands of kilometers of ocean at the speed of a jet airliner. The Type 16 ensures that if China tries to grab a remote island, They will be met with a wall of 105mm tungsten penetrators before they can even plant a flag. The eradication of the offensive prohibition. Moving fast is a brilliant capability, but speed alone cannot win a war if your political doctrine prevents you from going on the offensive. For 70 years, the Japanese constitution imposed a strict, uncompromising psychological and legal cage on the military. The JSDF was permitted to possess defensive weapons to repel a direct invasion of the homeland. But any capability that was inherently offensive or expeditionary, weapons designed to project power outward or seize territory, was considered an absolute political taboo. The most forbidden, politically radioactive capability of all was a Marine Corps. Amphibious infantry, troops specifically trained to launch from ships, assault hostile beaches and engage in violent, forced entry operations, are the ultimate tool of offensive warfare. For decades, the mere suggestion that Japan should develop an amphibious capability was met with outrage from pacifist politicians, who argued it was a return to the imperial aggression of the 1940s. But as Chinese militarization expanded and the threat of island seizures became an imminent, physical reality, the strategic planners in Tokyo realized that a purely defensive posture was a mathematical suicide pact. If China successfully seized the Senkaku Islands or landed troops on Yonaguni, the Japanese self-defense forces had absolutely no specialized, dedicated unit capable of taking them back. A standard army infantry regiment cannot simply rent a ferry boat and execute a D-Day-style landing against a fortified Chinese garrison. To survive the 21st century, Japan had to break the taboo. They had to build a spearhead. In 2018, shedding decades of political hesitation, Japan officially activated the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade, ARDB. By 2026, this force has matured into a fully operational, battle-hardened and highly lethal instrument of state power. The mechanics of island retaking. The ARDB is not a defensive guard force. It is an elite expeditionary vanguard. Modeled heavily on the United States Marine Corps, these operators are trained in the brutal, unforgiving art of combined arms amphibious assault. Their mandate is terrifyingly specific. If an adversary captures Japanese sovereign territory in the first island chain, the ARDB is the unit that kicks the door down and slaughters the occupying force. To execute this mandate, Japan has equipped the ARDB with the most advanced, specialized amphibious warfare technology in the Western arsenal. First, they acquired the AAV-7 amphibious assault vehicle. These are massive 30-ton armored tracked vehicles capable of launching from the well deck of an amphibious transport ship, like the Osumi class, miles off the coast. They swim through heavy, turbulent ocean surf, and drive directly onto a hostile beach, disgorging a squad of heavily armed, specialized infantry directly into the teeth of enemy defenses. But storming a beach is notoriously bloody and predictable. In modern warfare, relying solely on surface assaults is a recipe for massive casualties. To achieve true tactical surprise and overwhelming violence of action, the ARDB needed to strike from the sky. Japan became the first international customer for the Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey. The integration of the Osprey fundamentally alters the geometry of the ARDB's operational envelope. The Osprey is a tilt-rotor aircraft that combines the vertical takeoff and landing capabilities of a helicopter with the speed, range and high-altitude performance of a fixed-wing turboprop airplane. This means a Japanese amphibious-ready group can sit hundreds of miles offshore, safely over the horizon and out of range of enemy coastal defense cruise missiles. From that safe distance, they can launch a squadron of Ospreys, flying at 300 miles per hour, carrying combat-ready ARDB Marines. The Ospreys can completely bypass the heavily defended, mined beaches. They fly deep inland utilizing terrain masking techniques to execute a vertical envelopment. They drop troops directly onto the enemy's rear echelons, striking command and control nodes, artillery positions and logistical hubs, collapsing the enemy's defense from the inside out. To master this incredibly complex, highly dangerous choreography of air, sea and land assets, the ARDB cannot rely on the small, restricted training grounds of the Japanese home islands. This is why, in 2026, the ARDB is deeply, permanently integrated with the United States Marine Corps and the Australian Defence Force. They are conducting massive live-fire, combined arms exercises in the vast, unrestricted expanse of the Australian outback during exercises like Talisman Sabre. They are learning to coordinate live close-air support from F-35 stealth fighters while maneuvering under live artillery fire. By building the ARDB, Japan crossed the Rubicon. They proved to the world and to Beijing that they are no longer content to sit behind a shield and wait to be attacked. They have forged a sword, and they have trained a force of elite operators explicitly mandated to swing it. The greatest geopolitical shift of the century. The rapid deployment of the Type 16 and the offensive capability of the ARDB are monumental shifts. But the final, most devastating pillar of the Japanese Army's 2026 transformation is the one that completely destroys the strategic calculus of the Chinese Navy. It is the birth of the standoff infantry. For thousands of years, the role of the infantry was to engage the enemy in close combat. You looked down the sights of a rifle, you threw a grenade, or you fired an anti-tank missile at a target you could physically see. In 2026, the Japanese Ministry of Defense has fundamentally redefined what an infantryman does. They have taken the ultimate strategic weapons of the 21st century, long-range, autonomous, precision-guided cruise missiles, and handed the launch keys directly to the ground troops. This was the result of the historic, paradigm-shattering decision to acquire counterstrike capabilities. Facing a Chinese military that possessed thousands of ballistic missiles capable of striking Tokyo, Japan realized that relying solely on missile defense interceptors was mathematically impossible. You cannot catch every bullet. You have to kill the archer. To do this, Japan authorized the acquisition of long-range strike weapons capable of hitting targets deep inside enemy territory or sinking enemy fleets from hundreds of kilometers away. Crucially, they did not just give these weapons to the Air Force or the Navy. They heavily integrated them into the JGSDF, the 1,000-kilometer meat grinder. The primary weapon of this new doctrine is the upgraded Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, SSM. The baseline Type 12 was an excellent coastal defense missile, but it had a politically handicapped range of only 200 kilometers. The upgraded Type 12 is a completely different beast. It features aggressive stealth shaping to evade Chinese radar, a highly efficient turbofan engine, and an extended operational range of 1,000 kilometers, with future variants pushing toward 1,500 kilometers. Furthermore, Japan has purchased 400 American-made Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles, capable of striking land and maritime targets from over 1,600 kilometers away. These weapons are mounted on heavy, highly mobile transporter erector launcher (TEL) trucks, operated by newly formed, specialized JGSDF missile regiments. Let us wargame the absolute nightmare this creates for the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy plan. Imagine a massive Chinese carrier strike group attempting to push out of the East China Sea, aiming to project power into the Philippine Sea to threaten Guam or outflank Taiwan. To do so, they must transit through the narrow choke points of the Ryukyu Island chain, such as the Miyako Strait. In the old paradigm, the Chinese fleet only had to worry about Japanese destroyers or F-35s, which they could track on radar and engage. Under the new standoff infantry doctrine, the threat is completely invisible. Days before the Chinese fleet even leaves port, JGSDF missile regiments have dispersed across the Ryukyu Islands. They drive their TEL trucks off the military bases and hide them deep within the dense, mountainous jungle canopies of islands like Ishigaki, Miyakojima, and Amami-Oshima. They park inside reinforced civilian highway tunnels. They deploy radar-scattering camouflage netting. They operate in absolute radio silence. They are ghosts. When the Chinese fleet enters the 1,000-kilometer threat ring, the Japanese infantrymen do not need to see the ships. They act as the fist of a much larger multi-domain kill web. A Japanese or American surveillance satellite or a stealthy F-35 flying passively hundreds of miles away detects the Chinese fleet. The targeting coordinates are beamed via a secure, jam-resistant data link directly to the ruggedized tactical tablets of the JGSDF missile commander hiding in a tunnel on Ishigaki. The commander authorizes the strike. The Japanese truck rolls out of the tunnel, elevates its canisters, and ripple fires a devastating salvo of stealthy, Mach 0.9 cruise missiles. The moment the missiles leave the tube, the truck lowers its launcher, the driver floors the accelerator, and the unit immediately relocates to a new, pre-surveyed hiding spot. This is the doctrine of shoot and scoot. By the time the Chinese counter-battery radar calculates the point of origin and launches a retaliatory ballistic missile, the Japanese truck is miles away, leaving the Chinese missile to detonate harmlessly against an empty stretch of asphalt. Meanwhile, the swarm of stealthy Type 12 and Tomahawk missiles schemes the wave tops, autonomously coordinating their attack vectors, and slams into the hulls of the Chinese destroyers and aircraft carriers. By turning their infantry into a road-mobile, highly dispersed strategic missile force, Japan has weaponized the geography of its archipelago. They have turned the entire first island chain into an impassable, 1,000-kilometer meat grinder. The Chinese Navy cannot destroy an enemy it cannot see, and it cannot survive a massive, coordinated missile swarm launched from the jungles of 100 different islands. The Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force of 2026 is unrecognizable from the force that stood guard during the Cold War. The old generals, who spent their careers commanding massive formations of heavy steel tanks, have been forced to step aside. The illusion of a symmetrical, set-piece battle on the plains of Hokkaido has been buried. In its place, Japan has forged the ultimate 21st century survival machine. They have embraced the brutal logic of strategic mobility, abandoning heavy armor in favor of the 100 km/h, C2 transportable lethality of the Type 16 MCV. They have shattered the political taboo of offensive operations, unleashing the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade to violently reclaim lost territory. And they have fundamentally redefined the role of the infantry, handing them the keys to 1,000-kilometer cruise missiles and turning the entire island chain into an invisible, decentralized fortress. The sleeping giant has not just awoken, it has completely re-engineered its arsenal. When the strategic planners in Beijing look toward the east today, they no longer see a pacifist nation constrained by its own constitution. They see a hypermobile, highly autonomous, missile-hauling ghost force that is perfectly integrated with the United States and Australia. They see an army that has stopped preparing for the last war, and has ruthlessly, mathematically optimized itself to win the next one. The death of the Japanese tank was the birth of Beijing's greatest nightmare. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that Japan's shift to wheeled vehicles and long-range missiles is enough to stop a Chinese amphibious assault? Or was abandoning heavy armor a fatal mistake? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay mobile, and we'll see you in the next one.